I want to go in depth.
Yeah, go someplace else.
A little bit more on the NCAA. And this came after the Kentucky loss to Wisconsin. Andrew Harrison was at the dais, if that's what you want to call it, the postgame press conference. And he was heard muttering these words about Frank Kaminsky. F that N word. Now, he made these comments following he and his brother and William Cauley-Stein walking off the floor and not even shaking the hands of the Wisconsin players. This could be a two-part conversation here. You are a professional athlete. After a game, do you shake somebody's hand? No big deal.
I've always gone out and shook someone's hand. But I've had great teammates who were great guys who didn't do it. As soon as the game was over, they ran off the field.
Right.
It doesn't influence my thinking about them as a person one way or the other. You just lost. You invested all this time. You went into the game expecting to win. So for suddenly you should be able to flip the switch and be gracious and congratulate those guys and good luck next game. That's never been that important to me.
Now, let's move it to a young kid sitting at a post-game press conference, didn't know that his face was too close to the microphone, and about Frank Kaminsky says, F that N word.
Right. Okay.
You can speak more fluently on this than I can.
Yeah, come on, man.
Well, you can.
Well, you're also a minority in some ways.
Being Jewish, listen, the only thing I qualify for is persecution.
Okay. All right. Yes. So I recognize what I'm about to say presents a amazing double standard.
Okay.
I do recognize that, but also recognize who's using that word, where it's used, and how it's used. So if the situation were reversed, if it was Kaminsky heard uttering that into an open microphone about Harrison. So typically when a white person is saying that word, they mean it in the very racial way that it's meant, and it stirs up emotions from the past and how that word was used, from slavery until today in a racial context. For a black, particularly a younger black person to say that about a white guy, it was perhaps a poor choice of words, but also a culturally, within a younger urban setting, culturally relevant way of using that. So what he said, you will hear that on every basketball court, in every gathering of young, not every, but a majority of gathering of young black urban men would use that exact same phrase in that exact same way, and there's no racial context to it.
I have never been on one of those playgrounds, but I know enough people who have. And one of those guys is a friend of mine who's a good friend of yours, who's played on those playgrounds. We had this exact conversation on the radio show that I do on Mile High Sports Radio. He and I did the show in Morning Drive. Mike Pritchard.
Right.
And he said there is a difference between the N-word ending in an R, ER, and an A. And and One is a heck of a lot more derogatory.
Yes.
One is more of a, you're my buddy.
Right.
The other one is, I'm going to get you.
Right.
And the one at Kaminsky was an ER. It wasn't an A. He's my he's my difference.
Right. But we need to remove the racial thought from how it was said, from what was said, and from who it was said by. There was no racist intent with that word.
Okay.
It was much more a cultural diss, but not a racial diss.
Can we be fair, though? You played football at every single level and at the highest level of the high level. When you played football at Colorado, you played football for the Steelers, the Seahawks, the Patriots. If you get beat by a white guy, you get beat by a white guy. It just happens.
Right.
But on the playground, as a black player, you get beaten by a white player, it would seem to me you're never going to hear the end of it.
Yes, there is a certain amount of misplaced pride if you are black and you suddenly know how to play basketball, great, and there's not a white guy on the planet who can beat you.
Right.
At the same time, as begrudgingly as it would be to get this out of young, urban black males, they all would agree Larry Bird is amazing.
Right.
You know, Dirk Nowitzki has a amazing fall-away jumper.
You know what they'd say? That white boy can play.
That white boy can play. Yep. Yes. Steve Nash can distribute the basketball amazingly.
That white boy can play.
Yes, but it's couched in those terms.
Right.
He's not a great player.
No.
That white boy can play.
Exactly.
So, again, I know we are at a point where it's an amazing double standard.
Right.
Because if it was a white dude to say, that black boy can play.
Whoa!
Right. So I recognize the double standard of it all.
Right.
And I recognize how we are at a time in America where white males, particularly maybe 35 to 55, feel particularly persecuted against, and they don't know where they can go with some of this stuff.
Right.
Because they hear it happening culturally, but they can't take part in it.
Right.
So I understand that's difficult,
right.
But that also is turning a blind eye to the amazing amount of privilege that life has given them as white males here in America.
It's kind of like being invited to the buffet, which is your radio station, but you can't sit down and enjoy any of it. You can sing your country songs, but that good-looking food over there that you really want to taste, you're just not allowed to have a piece of it.
I'm sorry,
when you listen to 107.5, you're just not allowed to walk out of the house and talk about that stuff.
Right, you know, I'm sorry as a white man that the life presents you with such difficulties.
At 46 years old, it's not a problem for me.
Okay.
At 46 years old, it's not a problem for me. But for a kid who's a freshman at Cherry Creek High School, they want to say those words, and they shouldn't say those words.
But they can, in certain cultural circles. As the younger generation of white males are allowed to do things that an older generation of white males are not allowed to do.
Right.
Because they are more immersed in the urban culture than a 50-year-old white dude from Wisconsin.
Right.